Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyadesh Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasa Digaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Welcome devotees. So today we'll in the 6th canto, chapter 15, verse number 1 to 7. We'll try to cover that. So this is basically, this section is essentially Narada Muni and Angira Rishi. They are coming to instruct Chitraketu Maharaj, whose son is dead. I think the previous speaker might have talked about how Maharaj Chitraketu suffered so much in terms of marrying so many lakhs and lakhs of wives, but yet not fructifying into a child, who could be called Putra. So Putra, the name Putra comes from a person, a son who can save his father from the hellish planet called Putuhu, right? Somebody who can relieve the father from the effects of the hellish planet Putuhu is called Putra. That's why it's called Putra. So Putra is someone who's entrusted with an ability to basically deliver his father from hellish planets. So that's the brief background behind it. And here Narad Muni Maharaj is next to the dead body of his son, and Narada and Angira, they instruct Chitraketu Maharaj about spiritual consciousness, Sad Uktibihi. So essentially, in this first 7 verses, I have recently lost my father just about 2 weeks back on July 14th, and I can relate a lot with these verses because much of these verses actually gives us the courage of losing someone. If we were to lose someone very, very close to us, what should be our consciousness? What should be our mentality? How should we be able to tide over this suffering, this sorrow, and come back to our day-to-day activities, both spiritual and material? Right? So this will give us the right mindset to be able to get there. So without further ado, I'll basically chant the verse. Shri Shukha Uvacha Uchatur Vrit. I'm not able to see the full screen. Just go to my. Okay. Shri Shukha Uvacha Uchatur Vritakopante Patitam Vritakopamam Sokha Bibhutam Rajanam Bodhayantau Sad Uktibihi. Anybody wants to read the translation?
Shall I, Prabhuji?
Yes, please.
Translation. Please scroll upward. Translation by Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sri Sukadeva Goswami said, while King Chitraketu, overcome by lamentation, lay like a dead body at the side of the dead body of his son, the 2 great sages, Narada and Angira, instructed him about spiritual consciousness as follows. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Napoli. So, not much to comment on this verse, but a father seeing the dead body of his son and feeling sorrowful for that is definitely a position which nobody wants to ever get. Right? It's a very sobering feeling to be in that position, and particularly what happens is when it's during this time that all the past interactions come before us, right? We are able to, the whole thing plays out like a movie, right? Where you can, quickly see what really happened, how did the bonding grow, and all those bits. So let's go to the next one. Koyam syat tava rajendra bhavanyam anusochati Tvam chasya katam shruto puredanyam atah param.
Shall I read Prabhuji translation?
Yes, Mataji, please.
Translation by Prabhupada ki Jai. O King, what relationship does the dead body for which you lament have with you, and what relation do you have with him? You may say that you are now related as father and son, but do you think this relationship existed before? Does it truly exist now? Will it continue in the future? Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna Dandavad Pranam.
Thank you, Mataji. Anybody wants to read the purport? There is a purport also.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Yes.
Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. The instructions given by Narada and Angira Muni are the true spiritual instructions for the illusion conditioned soul. This world is temporary, but because of our previous karma, we come here and accept bodies, creating temporary relationships in terms of society, friendship, love, nationality, and community, which are all finished at death. These temporary relationships did not exist in the past, nor will they exist in the future. Therefore, at the present moment, the so-called relationships are illusions. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji. So here, Narada Muni and Angira Muni, they are educating Chitraketu Maharaj about. You see, the important thing is when during your times of such crisis, where a person has lost his son, emotionally, if you try to educate the person, it won't fly because emotionally the person is already under distress. So the only way to rectify the suffering of such a person is to be able to apply to his intelligence, basically to instruct to his intelligence, so that he is able to see the bigger picture and finds it easier for him to deal with the crisis, make his mind stronger. So the reason why we read philosophy is not because Lord expects us to be thorough in philosophy, only then the love of Godhead can develop. No, not at all. The whole aspect of being able to understand and be thorough with the philosophy is to be able to purify our intelligence. That should our faith be put to test, then we still have the right intelligence to be able to get our faith back on track. Right? So it's important from a perspective of ensuring that our faith remains unshaken, that we basically go through the philosophy. And here, Narada Muni and Angira Muni are basically talking to Chitraketu Maharaj more by appealing to his intelligence, where they're talking about how it's, the whole thing that has unfolded before him is so temporary. Nothing happened before this, nothing happened will happen after this, because the body has left the soul. The soul has, left the body. Now, the important thing is that the person who was so-called son of Chitraketu Maharaj, just about maybe a couple of days before the event happened, now we refer to such a person as body, right? We're not, the person in that body is no longer there. He's left the material world and gone into what is ascribed as per karma. I do hear some background noise. If somebody can go on mute, please. So here in the verse number 2, the important takeaway is there are no factual relationships. So a dead body for which anyone laments, that dead body will again be gone, because either it will be cremated, the body will be cremated, because the respect for an individual is only as long as the soul is part of the body, right, and it's functioning. Now, the moment soul leaves, it becomes that matter. The person in the body is no longer there. So therefore, it's basically something that needs to be disposed of, not something that we need to treasure, right? So the value of a person is only when the soul is connected with the body, right? So now that that position doesn't hold true, the body basically which is next to Chitraketu Maharaj, has no relationship with Maharaj, and therefore there's a mention that what is the relationship you have with this body? There's nothing, right? The relationship which existed was before the body was there with the soul. Body and soul were together. So that's the part. So let's move to the next one. Yata prayanti samayanti shuto vegena balukah samyujayante viyujayante tata kale nadehinah. Anybody wants to read the translation?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, can I?
Yes, yes, Mataji.
That's
Some background is coming. Some background noise.
some the living entities who have accepted material bodies sometimes come together and are sometimes separated by the force of time. Purport by Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The misunderstanding of the conditioned soul is the bodily conception of life. The body is material, but within the body is the soul. This is the spiritual understanding. Unfortunately, one who is in ignorance, under the spell of material illusion, accepts the body to be the self. He cannot understand that the body is matter, like small particles of sand. Bodies come together and are separated by the force of time, and people falsely lament for unification and separation. Let one knows this, there is no question of happiness. Therefore, in Bhagavad Gita 2.13, this is the first instruction given by the Lord. Dehi no yatha dehe kaumaram yovanam jara tata dehan prapti tira tatra namuhiyati. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. The self-realized soul is not bewildered by such a change. We are not the body. We are spiritual beings trapped in the body. Our real interest lies in understanding this simple fact. Then we can make further spiritual progress. Otherwise, we remain in the bodily conception of life. Our miserable material existence will continue forever. Political adjustment, social welfare work, medical assistance, and other programs manufacture for peace and happiness will never endure. We shall have to undergo the suffering of material life one after another. Therefore, material life is said to be Dukhalayam Ashashvatam. It is a reservoir of miserable condition. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you. Then
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mataji. So here it's a very important point that Prabhupada is making about the differentiation of body and soul. Right? Now, what are the problems that we see today, currently, when we sometimes we get into this bodily conception of life, right? So, can anyone, talk about what are the problems with the bodily conception of life? Anybody?
Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi, Prabhuji.
Yes, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi, that's true. We'll have to go through this repeated cycle of old age, birth, death, and diseases. And now, yes, that is true. But in a day-to-day living, right? How does it disturb us? This bodily conception of life. In the sense,
We can't
if
keep
somebody, yes,
our
Mataji.
mind. Yeah, we can't focus on,
what to say. Yeah, it's like we remain in Maya illusion. We consider that only the sense objects, the pleasure we get out of that is only the success in life. We
Correct.
don't know.
Correct. That's a very good point. I was eagerly, looking out for someone to make that point. Yes, that's true. Now, what happens is when we live in a bodily conception of life, now sense gratification becomes predominant, right? Because there's one life. The typical attitude is there's one life, live it to its fullest, right? That's what many materialists will say. If you tell them, why are you spending time only in sense? There's no harm in choosing a better life for yourself, right? But as long as that life, you don't lose the objective of life, that the whole objective of ante Narayana Smriti. At the end of the time, when our time is up, we should be able to remember the God. And the whole journey of chanting, reading books, preaching, spending time in classes like this is to be able to remember the Lord when our time is up, right? And that doesn't happen without practice. It's very difficult to have done sense gratification throughout the life, and in the last 1 minute, magically anybody is able to remember the Lord, right? That is very difficult. So our consciousness develops based on what kind of activities we indulge in, right? Now, in a bodily conception of life, sense gratification becomes the most predominant thing to be done. And as a result, what happens is the over attachments with both persons and objects becomes a feature of life. So Chaitanya Charan Prabhu very interestingly says that we basically we use people and respect objects, right? Even in the bodily conception of life, we tend to, anybody who has bought a prized possession, maybe a very expensive car, you'll watch out that there are no scratches. Even if that car has brushed some individual and he's at pain, right? The attention is not so much on the person who has been paid by that vehicle, but rather whether the vehicle is in good condition. I spent so much of money, I'm so, the car has to remain in a polished condition, etc., etc. So it just worsens. Only the first is material, there's a sense gratification. Second is we start to respect objects and use people, right? Well, it should be the other way around. And also completely puts us in a mood of illusion, right? We tend to live more with Maya. The moment we are mostly in bodily consciousness, so anything which needs to be done to keep us up and running, like for example, definitely we need to have the meals or the prasadam, which will keep us energized, necessary water, etc. But then, if somebody becomes picky that I need 15 items on my plate, only then it will satisfy my palate. That is completely a bodily conception or a self gratification, right? Now, in this discussion, the particular Bhagavad Gita verse 2.13, Deno asmin yatha dehe kaumaryam yauvanam jara tata dehantarar prapti tiras tatra namuyati. So the whole aspect that it's the soul which is witnessing the body metamorphizing from a child to a boyhood to old age. The soul is still the same. The soul can still remember, if somebody's got good memory, that how the person was behaving during college days, right? And how things have changed. Maybe people have come and left. There is all the sorrows, all the all the happiness, all those thoughts come in, and he is able to remember. The soul remains the same, but then the soul can remember the fact that the body was so energetic at some point, and now it's unable to move so much, right? There's so much of pain because of old age, joint pain, unable to get up, diseases, chronic diseases, which has started to completely bother the person. So there is a medical study which also says that in 7 to 8 years, every cell of the body is refreshed with a new cell, right? So even though we feel that the body has not changed, every cell in the body has changed. And anybody who looks at his photographs, in the past photographs, you can see the body has actually changed. A body of a person in the childhood and the body of a person in his old age, if we keep it together in the same frame, it's very difficult to find out if it's the same person in both these bodies, right? The body and the face, everything looks so drastically different. So it is not that somebody has to give up one body to see the other body. It's basically in the same body itself we can see the whole changes coming through, right? So basically there's another important thing which Prabhupada mentions here, which is political adjustments, social welfare work, medical assistance, and the other programs we have manufactured for peace and happiness will never endure. Now, political adjustments means what Prabhupada is saying is typically like things like democracy or autocracy or any other way of running the government. Social welfare work is essentially people do a lot of charity. There are NGOs, there are organizations which are in the public good. And medical assistance is typically hospitals and other infrastructure that we've created. None of it will give you the peace and happiness, as it will never endure. Because at the end of the day, even if somebody, let's say, has gone and gotten himself a good medical treatment, the quality of life doesn't remain the same. Most of the cases, people have been able to add years to life, right? But they have not been able to add life to years, right? So unfortunately, for namesake, there is an extension or longevity which has been achieved, but is a person truly happy in that extended life? That is worth questioning. Now, so that is the part why it mentioned that happiness will never endure. We shall have to undergo the sufferings of material life one after another, and then there is this mention of dukkhalaya ashashvatam. So there is a comparison of this. There is this very interesting story in one of the Upanishads which is mentioned that a person is being chased by a tiger. So what happens is, so as he is trying to evade the tiger, it's in a deep forest. There is an open well, and this person is basically, he's falling down the well, and the well is pretty deep. Now, as he's falling down the well, he's crying out in help, and suddenly there is a creeper which he's able to lay his hands on. And the person is now afloat. He's between the opening of the well and the rock bottom of the well. So what he's able to see is at the bottom of the well, there are all these huge serpents which are waiting for this person to slip in, and they can make a nice meal out of him. And then this person is watching, he's looking at the top of the well, and he can still see the tiger looking forward to him coming out of the well. And the moment he makes his escape good, he'll be eaten by the tiger any which way. And while he thinks that, okay, let me somehow pass my time between the tiger and the serpents under the well, then he's able to see that on the creeper on which he's holding himself, there is a rat which is eating away one creeper at a time, right? So even that is short-lived. And during all this, during this entire episode, what's really happening is there is a tree right outside the well, and there is a big beehive, and there are droplets of honey which are basically coming out of the beehive and falling right on the mouth of this person who's on the creeper, right, holding the creeper. So these are the bits of happiness that a person is able to get in this life, which is so temporary. The mice, which is eating away the creeper, is representative of the day and night. And with every day and night, we're only closer to death, right? And death itself is manifesting both at the bottom and at the top. Top through the lion, at bottom through the serpent. So, so this is our position. And Prabhupada quotes this example in many places to show how temporary this life is. And the happiness that we see in this life is only that moments of honey that is coming right and on our lips, and we are smacking it through our tongue, right? So this is our position. And what will give us the relief is the fact that, is there a way I can break this cycle of birth and death? What can I do to do that? So that's where we start to purify our consciousness. We start to have a larger objective of, following the Krishna of consciousness, trying to give our manasa, vacha, karma, attributing all of it to the Supreme Lord, purifying our karmas completely, and definitely all this by chanting the holy name. Now, what is for sure, which Lord says when we do all these activities, the famous Bhagavad Gita shloka, Neha Vikrama Nasosti, Tatra Vayo Na Vidyate, Swalpam Apyasya Dharmasya Trayate Mahato Bhayat. Now, what is that? Essentially, that whatever spiritual activities we have done, unlike material activities, they will survive birth after birth, right? And that is there in Lord's record book. So anything we do in our material world, anything that we do materially is logged by in Yama's book, and anything we do spiritually is logged by Lord in his own accounting book, right? So what would happen is that all the spiritual activities will have its longevity beyond the current birth. Anybody who's had couldn't complete his spiritual life will get another opportunity in another body in a much better position, in a more favorable family, or in a favorable atmosphere in terms of both spirituality and material comforts. So that's the bit. And so our goal is actually not, our goal is a bit lofty. Our goal is the fact that when we chant the holy names, it is not so much to cut the karma. That is a side effect, right? Which is definitely going to happen. But our goal is to basically earnestly pray to the lotus feet of the Lord and his consort, the energetic. The Lord is the energetic, and energy is Radharani. So we are humbly praying that we should be given a chance to serve them. And when we do that, when we ask sincerely by chanting the holy names, we are essentially trying to please them, right? The chanting of holy names is not for our pleasure, it is for the pleasure of Krishna. Now, obviously, when we give pleasure to Krishna being the reservoir of happiness, we'll also get the happiness as a side effect again. Right? So our mission or our objective is to please the Lord. And when we please the Lord, we get the right opportunities to serve the devotees. And when we also serve the devotees well, we also are able to give pleasure back to the Lord, because Lord is more pleased when we serve his devotees well without committing any sin. So that's the very important takeaway from this shloka. Any questions? Because it's the only shloka so far where there was a purport given. Any questions on this?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. 1 second.
Yes.
Divya Mataji. Divya Mataji. Hare Krishna, Divya Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Mataji, can you please mute yourself? Thank you so much, Mataji.
Okay, Mataji.
Sorry, sorry, Prabhuji, you can continue.
Yes. So we'll go to the next verse. Yata dana suvaidhana bhavanti na bhavanti cha evam bhutani bhuteshu choditani sa mayaya. Anybody wants to read the translation of that? Yes.
Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Dandavat Pranam Prabhuji. Translation by Srila Prabhupada: when seeds are sown in the ground, they sometimes grow into plants and sometimes do not. Sometimes the ground is not fertile and the sowing of seeds is unproductive. Similarly, sometimes his prospective father, being impelled by the potency of the Supreme Lord, can get a child, but sometimes conception does not take place. Therefore, one should not lament over the artificial relationship of parenthood, which is ultimately controlled by the Supreme Lord. Purport.
Yes,
Purport.
please.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Purport by Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Maharaja Chitraketu was actually not destined to get a son. Therefore, although he married hundreds and thousands of wives, all of them proved barren, and he could not beget even one child. When Angira Rishi came to see the king requested the great sage to enable him to have at least one son. Because of the blessings of Angira Rishi, a child was sent by the grace of the, Maya, but the child was not to live for long. Therefore, in the beginning, Angira Rishi told the king that he would beget a child who would cause jubilation and lamentation. King Chitraketu was not destined to get a child by providence or the will of the Supreme. Just as the sterile grain cannot produce more grain, a sterile person by the will of the Supreme Lord cannot beget a child. Sometimes a child is born even to an potent father and sterile mother, and sometimes a potent father and fertile mother are childless. Indeed, sometimes a child is born despite contraceptive methods, and therefore the parents kill the child in the womb. In the present age, killing children in the womb has become a common practice. Why? When contraceptive methods are taken, why don't they act? Why is a child sometimes produced so that the father and mother have to kill it in the womb? We must conclude that our arrangement of so-called scientific knowledge cannot determine what will take place. What is enacted actually depend on the supreme will. It is by supreme will that we are situated in certain conditions in terms of family, community, and personality. These are all arrangement of the Supreme Lord according to our desires under the spell of Maya, illusion. In devotional life, therefore, one should not desire anything, since everything depends on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as stated in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.1.11. Anya bilashata shunyama gnana karmadhya anavratama Anu kulena Krishnanu Silanama Bhaktira Uttama. One should render a transcendental loving service to the Supreme Lord Krishna favorably and without desire for material profit or gain through fruitive activities or philosophical speculation. That is called pure devotional service. One should act only to develop Krishna consciousness. For everything else, one should fully depend upon the Supreme Person. We should not create plans that will ultimately make us frustrated. Hare Krishna, Guruji, Dhanvat Pranam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mataji. It's a very deep purport and deep shloka. Now, Angira Muni has already warned Chitraketu Maharaj that this child will be both cause for jubilation and also sorrow, right? He'll be cause of jubilation and lamentation. Now, Maharaj Chitraketu made all attempts. He married hundreds of wives, all of them turned barren, and he could never get a son. And of course, the son got killed as a result of envy, deep envy in one of his, wives, right? Who felt that king was not giving them attention as a result of the childbirth, and only one particular queen was getting all the attention. Right? Now, so Maharaj Chitraketu, though he was not destined by providence or by the will of Supreme, he still endured. He tried hard, and he did with some sukriti, some benevolence by sadhus. He got a child, but the child was not to live for long. As by providence. When I say providence, it is essentially the Supreme will. Now, there's also a very interesting analogy here, which Prabhupada says, that a child, sometimes when both the male and female, they are impotent or sterile, yet a child is born. And both are fertile, yet a child is not born. Now, how do you explain all that, right? So behind childbirth, there is a very important factor, that is the will of the Supreme, right? The seed-giving father, in case of a childbirth, and his consort or his wife, who receives the seed, and then gives the right nutrition for the seed to fructify into a child, right? In this particular case, now the bij, the original seed, comes from the Supreme Lord. Aham bija pradhaninam. So basically, he's the original seed-giving father, right? And that is very clearly coming out in a childbirth. So the original seed comes from him. It's all part of his plan. And it's also very surprising that that with all contraceptive measures also, yet a childbirth happens. And then there is this whole turmoil in this entire world about abortion laws, right? People just don't know whether to allow or not to allow, right? And there are a lot of deeper conditions. What if the child is not normal? Then should you allow abortion or not? What if the child is come through by force? A person like somebody like a rape victim. Should you allow childbirth to happen in such case? Because that can be, that can make the life very difficult for his mother, his or her mother. Right. So those are the bits which things are, and Prabhupada, in a lot of his purport, says this: the act of procreation should only be done in producing Krishna conscious children. Now, it's basically because anything else which is done otherwise becomes sense gratification, right? It's only if somebody wants to raise Krishna conscious children that the act of procreation can be done. Now, this bit is very difficult to digest, but that's the truth. Now, the other important aspect here is that if you look at society in general, the whole society, there is this living in relationships. People, there is no marriage, official wedlock which happens, and people are, as Prabhupada says, they're living like pigs, right? Anybody can unite with anybody, right? And marriage, in fact, Western countries, it's gone to the extent that there is children coming out of living in relationships, and then nobody knows legally how things would proceed, based on if their parents separate or they unite, what happens basically. So the institution of marriage has been given in Vedas for reasons very important, where essentially to allow children to be brought up in a very spiritual way, so that they can take the charter of Vedas forward, right? They're given the right samskaras, right? And they are brought up in a very nice way, that the children are very respectful of their parents. They are able to take the charter of Vedas forward, and that also marks the success of marriage, because at the end of the day, children are not just machines to make money, right? That many households, they produce a lot of children just so that children become a way of generating more money, more income for the family. They will do some menial jobs, and that's not the intent of a marriage, right? As an institution, in the institution of marriage is more to sanctify the procreation, the act of procreation, so that the children are born out of proper varnashram dharma, and they are able to get the right samskaras, and they are able to make progress in life, right? That's another important aspect. And here, there's also a very important aspect of where Prabhupada mentions Anyabhilashita Shunyam Jnana Karmadi Anavritam Anukulena Krishnano Shilinam Bhakti Ruttama. So Anya Abhilashita Shunyam. So basically, shunyam is what? Bringing to zero. What? Any other desires. And what we need to do? Basically, so without desire is the shunyam. For material profit or gain through fruitive activities of philosophical speculation, what we should do is basically any activity or any transcendental loving service, like applying your the jnana, the basically doing any activity which is basically anukul to Krishna consciousness or to please the Supreme Lord, that should be taken up. Right? So one should only act to develop Krishna consciousness. For everything else, one should fully depend upon the Supreme Person. We should not create plans that will ultimately make us frustrated. Now, obviously, Prabhupada has mentioned this, and just so that we are very clear about the last couple of sentences, it does not mean that we should not do anything to help ourselves, right? For example, as part of our day-to-day functioning, we do need financial assets. We do need some sorts of financial security so that we can retire peacefully and so that we can spend the time before and after retirement even more in Krishna conscious activities. But that doesn't come free, right? That comes with some aspect of financial security. Now, what is definitely allowed is to make sure that we are able to accumulate enough just so that we are able to lead a life which is trouble-free in terms of keeping all our focus only in Krishna conscious activities. That time, this over endeavor to make more money, take a part-time job, that should not be in our wish list. So, Prabhupada obviously is not calling out those activities. Those are definitely allowed. But we should not create over-endeavoring plans. Like, for example, today somebody has a big job, a very good salary, and he's able to find time to do Krishna conscious activities. It's not that he keeps doing a job hopping and gets into 5x of what he's making, and then he essentially is spending the whole time only in office and he's not able to manage his spiritual and material life together, and is also neglecting his health and family as well. So those kind of over-endeavoring activities is definitely not encouraged. And that's where we have to be using judgment in some cases, and also consult superiors on, if somebody is making a very big decision in life. Devotees and some superiors, they are able to advise very well. Like, for example, somebody is taking a very, very huge loan, and there is it does create taking huge loans at any age can create a lot of stress. So is that stress worth taking? Should he those are some decisions for sure. Somebody can consult higher ups and get a very good advice, very, very sound advice on that. The whole intent here is to ensure that we are able to spend our time, we are able to settle ourselves materially. This does not mean that we completely become a vagabond. We just give up everything. When I say give up everything, when let's say there is a family to be supported, suddenly somebody develops a vairagya bhav and he says that I'm going to resign my job and I'm going to cut everything else. I'll cut my relationships with everybody else. It doesn't mean that you bring your anyone brings his family to a footpath. It definitely means that you carry out your responsibilities as a responsible father, husband, or any other relationship. Yet you are focusing, channeling your life in Krishna conscious activities, just so that you have a sidekick going. When I say sidekick, what I mean is the Krishna conscious activities becomes prime time at some point. So we take some investment of our current life in doing activities which we will make it prime time when we are sorted out in a way that we don't need to be working at some point, right? At that time, obviously, our full consciousness is only for service of Krishna. So, so these are the things which these are the ways of interpreting this purport. And of course, we should consult our superiors in a very proper way to get sound advice. So we'll go to the next one. I know we're a little out of time, but I want to make sure that I make up for the time lost. So anybody, I'll read the verse. This is 16.15.5. Vayam cha tvam cha ye cheme tulya kalas characharah janma mrityor yata paschat prananaivam aduna pibo. Anybody wants to read the translation of purport?
Srila Prabhuji.
Yes, Mataji, please.
Rohini Mataji, can you share that one, Mataji? 15.5. Translation.
Sorry, Mataji, there was a problem.
Okay, Mataji, translation. No? Translation by Prabhupada ki jai. O King, both you and we, your advisors, wives and ministers, as well as everything moving and not moving throughout the entire cosmos at this time, are in a temporary situation. Before our birth, the situation did not exist, and after our birth, it will not exist no longer.
Okay.
It will exist no longer. Therefore, our situation now is temporary, although it is not false. Purport by Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The Mayavadi philosophers say, Brahma, Satyam, Jagan, Mithya. Brahman, the living being, is factual, but his present bodily situation is false. According to the Vaishnava philosophy, however, the present situation is not false, but temporary. It is like a dream. A dream does not exist before one falls asleep, nor does it continue after one awakens. The period for dreaming exists only between these two, and therefore it is false in the sense that it is impermanent. Similarly, the entire material creation, including our own creation and those of others, is impermanent. We do not lament for the situation in a dream before the dream takes place or after it is over. And so, during the dream or during a dreamlike situation, one should not accept it as factual and lament about it. This is real knowledge. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Dhanvat Pranam.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mataji. So here, the thing to be absolutely clear about is that the situation, the life that we have is temporary. It's not false. Meaning all the events that are happening. It's just that the durability of these activities is temporary, right? We'll soon, the soul has to evict the body and take the next birth, right? And so basically the only thing, Brahma Satyam, so the Brahma word here attributes to the soul. Soul is permanent, body is temporary, right? And the thing to be careful about is, here is that the fact that the present situation is not false but temporary. It's not that things are not happening to us. If somebody is getting hurt, he is getting hurt. But all if we put a timeline on this, it's only bound by a time, depending on the age of the person. So therefore it is like a dream also, where something happens during the before and after the dream, as part of the dream itself, and therefore it is temporary in nature, not that they are false. So it's the impermanence that we have to take away. That is something that is mentioned. So we'll go to the next one. Bhuter bhutani bhutesha shajati avati hanti cha atma shiste asvatantre anapeksho balavat.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Yes.
May I read translation, Prabhuji?
Yes, Prabhu.
Translation by A.C. Bhakti Vedant Prabhupada ki jai. the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the master and proprietor of everything, is certainly not interested in the temporary cosmic manifestation. Nonetheless, just as a boy at the beach creates something in which he is not interested, the Lord, keeping everything under his control, causes creation, maintenance, and annihilation. He creates by engaging a father to beget a son. He maintains by engaging a government or king to see to the public welfare. And he annihilates through agents for killing, such as snakes. The agents for creation, maintenance, and annihilation have no independent potency. But because of the spell of the illusory energy, one thinks himself the creator, maintainer, and inhalator. Purport. Shall I read purport, Prabhuji?
Yes, yes, yes.
Purport by Prabhupada ki jai. No one can independently create, maintain, or annihilate. Bhagavad Gita 3.27 therefore says, Prakriter kriyamanani gunaihi karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. The bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself the doer of activities that are actually carried out of by nature. Prakriti, material nature, as directed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, induces all living entities to create, maintain, or annihilate according to the modes of nature. But the living entity, without knowledge of the Supreme Person and his agent is material energy, thinks that he is the doer. In fact, he is not at all the doer. As an agent of the Supreme Doer, the Supreme Lord, one should abide by the Lord's orders. The present chaotic, chaotic conditions of the world are due to the ignorance of leaders who forget that they have been appointed to act by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because they have been appointed by the Lord, their duty is to consult the Lord and act accordingly. The book for consultation is Bhagavad Gita, in which the Supreme Lord gives directions. Therefore, those who are engaged in creation, maintenance, and annihilation should consult the Supreme Person who has appointed them and should act accordingly. Then everyone will be satisfied and there will be no disturbances. Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Here, the focus is essentially on the doership, right? Who's the doer? So here, Prakrite Kriyamanani Gunai Karmani Sarvashah Ahankara Vimudatma Kartaham Iti Manyate. So the soul, which is under the three modes of material, which are the three modes of material nature here, which has been talked about? Anybody?
Goodness, passion, and tamas.
Ignorance. Yes, ignorance. Correct. Tamas. So the soul is under the three modes of material nature, right? So anybody who's going to be in the material world will always be tormented by the three modes of material nature. So any soul, that's why in spiritual world, there's only mode of goodness. There are the tamas and rajas will go away completely. Right? In fact, it will be Shuddha Sattva in the spiritual world. So you'll no longer be tormented by the three modes of nature, right? And Prakriti, which is basically the material nature, is always acts under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Prakriti is also one of the energies of the Lord, the external energy of the Lord, right? And induces, as that way, induces all living entities to create, maintain, or annihilate according to the modes of nature. So everybody is under the modes of nature, right? But the living entity thinks that he is doing everything. He doesn't know that he's under the influence of the three modes of nature, which is profound, which is completely there in this material nature. Right? Anybody is in the material who's there in this material world will always be subject to these three modes of material nature. Right now, in fact, he's not at all the doer. As an agent of the Supreme Doer, the Supreme Lord, one should abide by the Lord's order. So even these modes of material nature, they are under the direction of the Supreme Lord, right? Now, who's the doer? So there is this mention in several slokas in Bhagavad Gita. There is a mention of a living entity essentially endeavoring or having the desire. And then there is material nature, which will basically, which will make it happen, right? And then there is a place where that activity will be performed. Then there is then there is karma associated, of course, but most importantly, in granting the desire, the supreme will is given. So any activity we do in our life cannot happen without a supreme will. Now, and we have seen that in our previous examples also. We also saw how two individuals who are completely fertile, they can't give a progeny, they can't have a progeny, or they can't have a child. But it's also possible that two individuals who are sterile or infertile, they are able to have a progeny, right? So how do we explain that? So it's all because of the supreme will. So how much we are able to make peace with Lord's will decide how much happy or sorrowful we are in life. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do our endeavor. It always means that we should do our endeavor, but we should also know that there are limits beyond which there's no point going beyond. Right? So that is one thing we have to be absolutely clear about. Now, anybody who's having any level of authority in this society, like the so-called leaders, they're also appointed, or they're under the directions of the Supreme Lord. In fact, in Bhagavatam, the first canto, Parishit Maharaj, who is essentially the king of not just Hastinapur, but the definition of Bharat was pretty big, right? It entailed places like Thailand and Malaysia and other countries also. The definition of Bharatvarsh was pretty big. Now, Parishit Maharaj was also seen as a representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A king is seen as a representative of a Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, the king should not forget the fact that when he is in a position of authority, he has to abide by a law book. Now, that law book, I'm not talking about constitution in general, but specifically things like the Bhagavad Gita, the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, right? How that's the law book, right? Under which instruction the king or the leader has to operate. So that's the mention here, and Prakriti is always at the beck and call of the Supreme Lord. So we need to always be, anything that we are able to achieve, we should be able to thank the Lord immediately from the bottom of our heart with a deep sense of gratitude that, my dear Krishna, this couldn't have happened without your supreme will, right? I am just an instrument in your hands. So if we submit a prayer like this, we will always be able to detach ourselves from the fruits of any karma, and we'll be able to attribute the fruits that are coming out with a deep sense of gratitude to the Supreme Lord. If we have this mindset and consciousness, our activities will get purified, our thinking will get purified, we'll stay humble. We will never, such a person will never see arrogance. Nobody will call that this person basically acted arrogantly, because he's always acting with a deep sense of gratitude, and that to the Supreme Lord. So such activities, even if they are done with a profound consciousness, it'll have the impact of purifying us completely. Right? So that's a few takeaways from here, from this shloka. And that will satisfy not just the Supreme Lord, but the Jivatmas also very well. We go to the last verse in the shloka, in our section. Dehena dehino rajan, deha deho vijayate, vijat eva yatha bijam, dehiyat ivasashvataha. Anybody wants to read? The last shloka. Anybody wants to read?
Sindhu Mataji, you can read, Mataji.
I'll read, Mataji.
Yes, Mataji, you can read.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. 15.7 Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada ki jai. As from one seed, another seed is generated, O king. So from one body, the body of the father, through another body, the body of the mother, the third body is generated, the body of a son. As the elements of the material body are eternal, the living entity who appears through these material elements is also eternal. Purport? From Bhagavad Gita, we understand that there are two energies, namely the superior energy and the inferior energy. Inferior energy consists of the 5 gross and 3 subtle material elements. The living entity who represents the superior energy appears in different types of bodies through these elements by the manipulation or supervision of the material energy. Actually, both the material and spiritual energies, matter and spirit, exist eternally as potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The potent entity is the Supreme Person. Since the spiritual energy, the living being who's part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, desires to enjoy this material world, the Lord gives him a chance to accept different types of material bodies and enjoy or suffer in different material conditions. Factually, the spiritual energy, the living entity who desires to enjoy material things, is manipulated by the Supreme Lord. The so-called father and mother have nothing to do with the living entity. As a result of his own choice and karma, the living being takes different bodies through the agency of so-called fathers and mothers.
Thank you
Hare
so much,
Krishna.
Mataji. Thank you so much, Mataji. So here a lot of philosophy is mentioned here. So first thing, who's the seed-giving, original seed-giving father? Krishna. So as from one seed, another seed is generated. So if we try to track down where is the original seed coming, it's actually from Krishna. So that is mentioned here. Now, from one body, that is that of father, another body, the body of the mother, through another body. That means father is the seed-giving, father gives the seed and the mother bears the seed. Just like when we sow a seed in a soil, right? What happens? We sow the seed inside and then we water it, we give the nourishment, we have it's covered by a warm soil, and then the seed fructifies into a plant. Just on similar lines, the human body works. The seed is planted by the father, and the mother gives the right nutrition to the seed to fructify into an individual, right? And as the elements of the material body are eternal, the living entity also appears through these material elements, also eternal. That means let's take it a little deeper and let's look at the purport which Prabhupada has given. The living entity which represents the superior energy appears in different types of body through these elements by the manipulation or supervision of the material energy. So body, anybody, for example, based on his past karma, gets the body in his next life. Right? Somebody may be born beautiful, somebody may be born ugly. I happen to have read Garuda Puran, when this event of my father passing away happened. As part of the process, I read it. And there's a mention about, who gets what type of body based on what type of sins or goodness that the person has done, right? So, so somebody, it's also mentioned that, for example, if somebody is seen lusting in the current life, it's because he has performed certain karmas in his past life, or somebody is given a very beautiful or an ugly body based on, again, certain past karmas, right? In some cases, if somebody is sometimes it's also mentioned that if someone is born ugly, he's definitely acted against women in a particular way, or he has been lusting on somebody else's wife, etc., etc. So there are many such karmas which lead to certain outcomes, and so definitely the body is given by the material world, or by Prakriti, not material, Prakriti, based on past karmas, right? And the subtle body takes that physical body. Now, actually both the material and spiritual energies, matter and spirit, exist eternally. Now, what is striking out in this line is, how is matter existing eternally? Can someone explain? We always know spirit exists eternally, but how does matter exist eternally?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. All
Yes.
the constituents of the matter at the time of annihilation go into the body of Mahavishnu Prabhu and stays there.
Yes,
and when
yes.
annihilation takes place, it comes out from the body.
Very true. Very nice point, Mataji. Very nice. Any other point? Anyone? Any other point?
It's
So
the energy of the Supreme Lord, Prabhu. So it's eternal.
that's also true. Correct. Energy of the Lord is eternal. So therefore, matter is energy of the Lord, external energy of the Lord. So it is eternal. Very nice point. So it's also mentioned that matter goes through 6 kinds of transformations. Right? It takes birth in the womb of a mother's body, remains for some time, then it grows, produces some effects. Effects means children, progeny. Gradually it dwindles. So as people see that a person who's taken to old age, his body shrinks. Sometimes people see the height reduced. He'll have a he'll have a bent body. His legs will contract, and then so we can see that the body dwindles, and at last it vanishes into oblivion. Now, as part of these changes, what we also seen is that matter gets completely always recycled. Even in the current world, we'll see that matter will take different forms, but the matter doesn't get wiped out. Right? For example, even if the human body is burnt, what happens is the end product is still ashes. It's not a knot. It's not like that whole thing is wiped into an oblivion without leaving a trace. No. So that ash again, gets back into the river. It becomes part of the riverbed. Maybe it comes and gets washed up on the shore. So the matter, though the size is reduced, it does not become zero, right? So the matter will always go through these 6 steps of transition, where it will have its genesis, it will grow, it will produce side effects, it will dwindle and then vanish. But even when it goes into oblivion, it still leaves a footprint. So that's the part which is also being talked about here. So and then there's a mention that so the matter always, Prakriti is called out in Bhagavad Gita as eternal entity. So Kala, Kala is time. Time is also eternal. Prakriti, Karma, all these are eternal. Bhagavad Gita always talks about entities which are eternal. Right? It never talks about anything which is temporary. Of course, body is temporary, but it also calls out that the entities that I'm going to talk about are these which are eternal. The so-called, actually, the spiritual entity, the living entity who desires to enjoy is manipulated by the Supreme Lord. Right? How is he manipulated? How is the living entity manipulated?
Like by giving remembrance, knowledge, and
yes. So
forgetfulness.
yes. So Lord mentions here that Prabhupada mentions here in this purport that the living entity who desires to enjoy material things is manipulated by the Supreme Lord. So typically, the living entity is manipulated by assuming body consciousness. Right? The person thinks that body defines everything. So he gets into sense gratification and therefore is able to enjoy the material things. The so-called father and mother have nothing to do with the living entity. Why they have nothing to do with the living entity? Why is that mentioned? The so-called father and mother have nothing to do with the living entity. Aren't they father and mother to that person, that child?
The living entity has its own type of samskaras.
I can't hear you well, Prabhu.
What's
If you
the
can speak.
voice?
That living entity also is independent. That's why it is acting at its own level.
Yes, that's true. So first of all, the living entities, Lord mentions it in one of the shlokas in Bhagavad Gita that each of the living entities like a pearl, and he's the thread which is going through that pearl to create a beautiful necklace, right? So essentially, Lord basically, strung the living entities together in some sorts of relationship, right? He strung them in. It's the shlokas before this. There's a mention that each of the living entities are like particles of a sand who come together temporarily, but once the sand is thrown up in the air, right, they separate back again. They get different destinies, right? So our current birth, we do get some relationship like father, mother, uncle, aunt, niece, nephew, etc., etc. But these are temporary relationships, and the durability is only till the existence of life in that particular. So therefore, the whole prime point to drive home here is the temporariness of the relationship. As a result of the own choice and karma, the living being takes different bodies through the agency of so-called fathers and mothers. So what is mentioned here is that the karma influences, as I was talking about, people getting beautiful or ugly bodies, tall or short bodies, black or white bodies, etc., is based on certain karmas. So that's being called out here, that the subtle body, based on certain desires, gravitates towards getting a body, a physical body, which can satisfy or bring the desires of the living entity to fruition, right? So that's the point, which is, that's why there's a mention of own choice, because the own choice reflects the desire of the living entity. So somebody wants to, let's say, he lives with a end desire, and of course it has to be substantiated with karma. And let's say he's a deep desire of leading a wealthy life, and he couldn't in this current life. And if he has piled up karma for that, he will be given birth in a very affluent or rich family, or even if he's not given birth in that, his own karmas will make him rich over a period of time. So those are the bits which have been talked about here. I know we are a little out of time. Any question? We can take one question maybe before we end the class.
Prabhu, that question you asked, how the Lord manipulates, it's also through giving sufferings and happiness from time to
That's
time.
true. Correct. Very true, Mataji. Very true. Very nice point. Correct. So, yes. Yes, Mataji.
And also, I was wondering how some people come under the mode of goodness by birth, and some come under ignorance and do all abominable actions. No, Prabhu. So
Yes.
I was wondering about the reason why they become like that. Can you
Yes,
tell,
Mataji.
Prabhu?
Yes. There is no one answer for this, Mataji. See, there is also, people who fall down, people who are in spiritual path who fall down. That also happens, right? So we can't say that, while they had the embrace of the Lord, yet they fall down, right? That also happens. And there are people who come from certain backgrounds where there is no concept of spirituality, and they become the biggest preachers in ISKCON. That also happens. Now, there is no right or wrong answer here, but definitely, as much as our karmas and our endeavor is there is the biggest thing that we have to always think about is the supreme will, right? The Supreme Lord, if he chooses, he can make a person. If he chooses, he can break a person. There is a very popular quote in Bengali, Mare Krishna Rake Krishna Mare Ke. That means if Krishna has decided to kill a person, any material arrangement by the means of best doctors, best physicians, best medicines, best treatment, nothing will work. But if Krishna has decided to give person a life, then any material arrangement, however inferior they may be, like he may be in a government hospital, he may be almost on a deathbed, he may be operated upon by an individual who's not competent, yet he will come out magically out of the operation theater successfully. So everything else, even if you are able to reason, there is the supreme will, there is this, and he's Adok Saja, he's basically completely independent, right? Go to Bhagavatam's first verse, Janmati Yasya Charteshva Abhikya Swarat. There's a mention, there's a word called Swarat, that is independent. The supreme will, the Supreme Lord is completely independent. We are all dependent on him, right? So our definition is we are not Swarat, only he is Swarat. He has a mind of his own. We can request, we can pray, we can put a petition, but the sanctioning of that petition is with him. You may find and it's not that he acts whimsically. He has, a method to his decision making, mostly through karma and other things. And sometimes, like a president, when, somebody puts a petition, let's say he has gone through hundreds of crime and let's say he's been given a life sentence. Now, even in our current constitution, somebody can approach the president for amnesty, right? You can say, I'll write to the president to see if he can sanction him, a life sentence instead of death penalty. And if the president approves, then death penalty is not given, right? Similarly, Supreme Lord is like that president who has the ultimate authority to make or break. The only thing as individuals can do is pray at his lotus feet and give us the right consciousness that we're always able to render service to him. So that is our submission to him. That is our prayer to him. But he can act any which way. And he is Swarat. He is completely independent. The beauty also is, though we call him Swarat, if somebody basically approaches him with a lot of sincerity, and he becomes completely surrendered to him, Lord also likes to take a lower position in that relationship. And he will do the necessary to make the person give success to the individual. So that also happens. But we cannot dictate that kind of a relationship from the Lord. We can only submit ourselves. We can only surrender ourselves. So that is what we have in our control. So I'm not sure if answer, does it help, Mataji?
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you, Mataji.
So it's
Hare
basically our karmas which makes us is the reason for our destiny.
Yes, partly yes and no, because karmas can be overridden by Supreme Lord. He has like I was giving an example, by our karmas, if let's say somebody is given a death penalty, but
Yes.
somebody has done a petition to the president, he can convert the death penalty into a life sentence. Right?
Yes.
So you have to look at Supreme Lord as the ultimate beneficiary of who can change our position. Right? Our karmas can only take us only thus far, right? It can only take us some far. But if we have to burn our karmas, the only way out is to surrender ourselves to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, right? So what we want to do is get into a position where our activities or our destiny is completely controlled by the Supreme Lord, and karmas don't apply. And that is true for pure devotees. Karmas don't apply. It is direct will of the Supreme Lord that applies, right? And we are all trying to be pure devotees of the Lord. We are aspiring to be the pure devotees of the Lord. We are not quite there, right? So karmas can also be completely taken out of the equation by the will of Supreme Lord. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say here is there are external reasons, but the deep internal reason is the will of the Supreme Lord.
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you, Mother.
Yes. Thank you.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Gurudev ki jai. Thank you so much for staying late on the call and waiting. And my deep apologies for not starting on time, but I will make sure that this doesn't happen in future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Pranams, Prabhu.
Dandavat. Hare Krishna.